I think what all of this shows is that this is not just a medical phenomenon. So I think the central message for everyone to realize is that it goes beyond the health aspect. I mean, the health aspect is the central one, no question about it. But beyond that, it has now sort of has a life of its own in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, in the legal sphere. Like what is legal, what isn't legal, and what can the government do? What kind of laws is it invoking? Like not just legality of issues, but also how the government is invoking certain legal mandates, in the name of public health or all of these things. Like how is it using certain laws or what's it doing? How effective is it? The economic response has been unprecedented. The kind of stimulus programs directly sending checks to people. And so like that kind of thing, how effective is that? Because, till just a few months ago, the universal basic income was like, like no one was seriously considering it, very small fraction. But now it seems like that is happening in the here and now. So there is a very real social and economic phenomena, which I think needs to be documented.
On this week's episode of Establishing Your Empire, I host Mayank Kejriwal. Mayank is a researcher in the field of artificial intelligence with a focus on developing high-impact AI technology for addressing important social challenges such as human trafficking and disaster response. His work has been funded by DARPA and IARPA, and lately Mayank has been working on building a knowledge graph out of the tens of thousands of papers written about COVID-19, as well as hooking directly into what people are saying via social media to better understand the social and economic effects of this very unique time. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. I have a very interesting guest. This is going to be a lot different than most of my guests because I actually have a scientist, not just someone who's in business or just creative, but and it's got a whole list of a crazy background. You're in AI. You've been in. You've done more schooling than I ever have even thought of doing. You're all over the place. But what I'd like to start out is maybe just give us a background of who you are and what you do.
All right. So I think what I do is actually a lot easier to describe than who I am, because as you pointed out, I don't think I've figured it out yet. I've just been jumping around from place to place. And I think that kind of best describes who I am. But what I do is, so I'm a research assistant professor here at USC. And that means that I'm primarily an academic. I'm a researcher. So I do research in artificial intelligence, and specifically a field of artificial intelligence that is known as knowledge graphs, which has sort of really come into its own, I think, in the era of web search. And so we do a lot of research in that, and it's really cool stuff and very applied, and sort of very useful in a number of domains. And so I get to work with really interesting people from across industry and academia, and it's a really fun life. I love it.
So when you say it's useful in a number of areas, maybe give us a couple of those examples.
Sure. So I think the COVID-19 crisis that is ongoing would be a great example. So anyone who has been following the sort of the more technical side of the crisis, knows that the White House and a number of other agencies released this massive corpus of scientific papers, and other than that, a lot of organizations have released data. They are making data publicly available, where it's not impeded by privacy concerns or anything of that sort. But academic papers, data, resources, software, all of that is becoming openly available. Now, the question is that with all this massive data, how do you make it easy to answer questions, to search the data? If you want to know about a specific protein, for example, among 29,000 papers describing the coronavirus, or you want to know about, a certain gene or an interaction, or, it could be a biological fact, or more broadly, it could be something which has been researched but very difficult to find. Like maybe you do not know the terminology, it may be spread across multiple papers and so on. So what we do, and we're not the only ones doing this, but we have a major effort in this, is that we're trying to build a knowledge graph out of all of that data so that it's very easy for you to find entities of interest, whatever that might be, whether it's a protein or a gene or a biological entity. It could be an author of a paper, it could be an organization, it could be software, whatever it is. These are all entities. So if you want to find an entity and you want to find all the entities that are connected to that entity, and you don't want to read all the 29,000 papers to figure that out, that's where the knowledge graph really comes in. And so we built a knowledge graph over this entire corpus, and it becomes really easy to answer certain questions, to look up information on certain entities using the knowledge graph. So I think that's a very good application that has really come sort of illustrated to us how mature the field has become. Because just a few years ago, just a year ago, I would say, it would have taken a long time and a lot of people to build the kind of knowledge graph that we have been able to now build in, just I would say like a month or two. And
yeah. So is it something that's actually visually graphic? So where you can just grab certain, key phrases or keywords or filters and basically drill down into more of a specific area that you wanted to know more about? Is that kind of the way we're thinking of a knowledge graph, right? Because I'm more on the business side. So like, something like a Tableau came in and completely changed to how we could, anybody could play with the data. It used to be where it had to be this SQL expert in the basement that would get you your reports, and you had to wait on them, and it was expensive and brutal. And then, now I can go in there and say, I can give it a couple different key phrases or keywords, or just basically filtering or layers, or whatever, however you want to describe it, and get down to the info that really matters to me.
I think it's a little bit different because the value of the knowledge graph is that it actually helps the non-technical person to do very advanced kinds of search. So, for example, if you're a biologist and you want to know, what are all the proteins that are linked to this protein in the context of the coronavirus, or what are all the papers that are describing this gene, and how it's manifested in the coronavirus. Like for that kind of thing, the search engine would directly support you. So you do not actually need to use any kind of technical tool. Even Tableau is technical in the sense that you would need to be a BI person to use Tableau. But the scientists, they just want to search for things and find it. So it's more advanced than keyword search because the keyword search looks at every word equally. And by that, what I really mean is it can't distinguish between entities, relationships. These kinds of things it doesn't understand the concept of an entity. To it, everything is a word. So when you actually search for something, it uses an algorithm to figure out, how to match that word against documents. This is how search engines used to work. But actually right now, I mentioned web search early on. So if you search in Google for places to visit in Los Angeles, you won't actually just see a list of web pages anymore. A lot of people don't notice it because it's become so seamless, but you will actually see the list of places to visit in LA. So if you type it in right now, you will see that on the top of the web page, you'll actually literally see a list of places come up. And so you don't even have to click. Actually, the amazing thing is that even without clicking, you can find the answer to your question. Or if you type, when was George Bush born, it would be able to answer your question. You don't even, literally it would show you the answer. Like George Bush was born on this date. So it's not retrieving. It's not just retrieving items. It's actually understanding that you are talking about an entity and it's trying to get all the information about that entity. So it's much more advanced. It's not just matching.
The whole Google thing, they're really good at keeping traffic on their site
Yes.
instead of you leaving, right? That are continually getting better at that. So you're obviously probably going to be much more advanced in knowing what COVID is doing right now. Maybe give us kind of some of your thoughts and perspective of, and you can take it any direction you want. So with COVID right now.
So I am personally very interested in the social media aspect because I'm not a biologist. So I really have, I'm not even sure that I would be able to give a convincing answer to the difference between a gene and a protein. So that is how limited my biological knowledge is, so even a knowledge grab wouldn't be able to actually help me with trying to understand all the papers because I'm not a biologist, although I think for the biologists that would be very useful. But what I am very interested in is the social media aspect. So we have been collecting a lot of Twitter data. I think since January, there's a group within our institute that has been crawling Twitter, from the Twitter API since January. So they have tweets that go back to before this became such a big thing, with the lockdowns and all of that. The signs were beginning to already emerge, right? And even as early as January. And we've kept on collecting data since then. And so what we are looking at is applying natural language processing and other kinds of AI to see how the conversation evolved around this virus, like all over the world. We kind of see it in the news, right? The toilet paper running out. You see it in the grocery store in the news and so on. You have all the unemployment numbers and the, all kinds of different things, socio-technical things, and some of them purely social, some of them purely economic. But there's a lot of stuff that is going on around this virus, and it's not just the cure and the vaccine and the medical aspect, but there's a lot of economic and social findings, that we need to understand. What we have been trying to do is that we have been trying to monitor what people directly are saying. So this is not our opinion, this is not what the news media is saying, so all of that, if you think about it, is one layer removed from reality, because on the ground, you have a lot of people who are facing the consequences of this, and who were talking about this, and that's kind of like a micro communication. It's directly from the people. It's coming from the ground. So we want to try and understand the crisis from that point of view, which is that let's look at what people are saying, and can we apply advanced tools to figure out how this crisis evolved, and was there a signal in social media that sort of almost predicted the economic collapse to come, that predicted the lockdown? Could people see it coming even before there was an announcement? Because anecdotally, I have friends from who are students and colleagues and so on all over the world, and some of my Indian friends basically managed to leave the country where they were and get back to India before the lockdown happened. I have a friend in Spain. He very correctly predicted that there would be a lockdown coming, and kind of moved out of Spain and returned to his home in India to sit out this crisis. We have a PhD student here from India in our group who also managed to see it coming, and maybe he saw what was happening to Italy and after that to Spain and to other countries. He realized that it was going to happen to every country, and so he managed to leave and return to India before the whole lockdown happened. So people clearly have an intuition for this kind of thing. It spreads like contagion, the news and all the different aspects of this. So we are trying to study that now that we have all the data and we've seen what happened. And we have all this other data as well, right? The unemployment numbers in a given month, we now know what those are for February. We know what the unemployment claims are for February, what the status of small business was, and so on. So there are a lot of numbers we now have in retrospect. So we're trying to match all of that along with social media to see if to try and understand whether people sort of predicted what would happen. In a way,
and I think there's some financial institutes that might want some of that data too.
Yeah, I think they have it already. To be honest with you, the Twitter data is not publicly, but it can be bought and sold. And I should say it can be bought. I don't think it can be sold. But Twitter actually does offer an option where they can provide they can provide a massive amount of data under certain terms and conditions. There's also the public API. So we are using the public API, which puts limits on how much you can crawl in a given day. So everyone has access to that. I know that many of the financial institutions certainly buy a lot of data sets. They are in that business where they try to buy a lot of data sets to try and predict these kinds of things. But it's harder than that. I think it has less to do with access to the data. I think that's the easy part now, and more to do with what to do with that data, because it's very noisy. Like, you get all the Twitter data, and there's a whole bunch of it which is really not useful. It's people joking about things. It's bots, trying to do all kinds of things. It's retweeting going on, and just all kinds of things which are not useful, which are going to add noise to your analysis. So there is a certain sort of processing that you have to do before you can get to the point where it starts giving you useful predictions.
And that's a big deal. And I think that's where the more big data we have every day, every year, it's going to be like, okay, now what? Right? Just because you know all this, now what do you do with it? I think there's actually a parallel with that with people too. 100 years ago, if you knew a lot of information, you could be very valuable. Now, okay, like if you memorize so much stuff, okay, like I got a phone, like you might be a little faster than me on some stuff, but that value has gone down dramatically.
Right.
Unless you're able to use that information. So, okay, so you get all this data. It's very interesting. A lot going on. Maybe you could further predict. So what would you actually, let's say you had it and you said, okay, we figured out to a 90 percentile that we think at this day we should have done something. Is that something that you're kind of trying to get to where you say this, we see this, and in the future, this should, if then type of statement, right? I don't know. I'm just trying to think about like after you figure it out.
Yeah, there are two values to it. I mean, one is the purely scientific value, which is almost like the historian, I would say. Not really scientific. I would say it's more of one is a historian role, which is that what happened. Like we want the people to also tell the story, right? Because we don't just want this to become a story that is being a history that is being documented just through the eyes of the media, and because there is a very strong media bias, there's no question about it. We are starting to see a lot more polarization in the media, whether it's left or right wing, in all the news outlets, I think, and some of them are getting criticized for it also. But, there's a lot of information that we can get directly from the people. So one of the values of social media is that it really does take the microphone to the people, and especially if you do it if you're able to get signals at high volume, and you can get it from all over the world, and so on and so forth. So that part of the value of this is simply almost being a historian of sorts.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I also would think I think that a lot of social media, you do have the loud left and right. I actually think in this, I have no data to back this up, that the majority are probably more moderately in the middle, but the loud ones that make a lot of noise are the 10% each way, right? But the 80% are in the middle, and I don't know those numbers. Any thoughts there? Or are you too early to
know? No, I'm talking about the people who go really
extreme with this, right?
I think there are two things to keep in mind. So one is there is already a bias when you look at the people who are on social media. And specifically, I mean Twitter. So all the different platforms have their own bias. For example, TikTok, as you probably know, and before that, Snapchat, and then also Instagram, those tend to be more popular with younger people, with more visual people. Whereas the more professional people, I think, are more oriented towards, let's say, LinkedIn. Right. So I'm not that active on any of the social media platforms except LinkedIn, because I like to and I wouldn't even call that, I don't know if we can call it a social media platform, because it's not very friendly to conversation. It's really more like a blog, like you post material and you can learn about people and make connections. It is a social network, but it's not really social media friendly, I would say.
Yeah, it's like billboards. We all put billboards up because we don't want to put anything bad, because it actually financially affects
Exactly,
us.
Right. And then Twitter too tends to have a There are multiple studies we've done with Twitter. It's not just COVID-19. What we have found, very interestingly, is that, first of all, there's a very strong urban bias. So I'm trying to actually write about this right now, where what you will find is that in general, there are a lot of people focused or a lot of people tweeting from the cities and not as much from rural areas and I'm talking about developed countries, like rural areas or small towns, you just don't see that much. Even if you control for population, I think there is a certain bias. The extent of that is, I don't think it's a settled matter, but there is no question that there is a certain selection bias already when you look at people who are taking up on social media. Then the second thing is that you're absolutely right that, for certain, I don't want to call them loudmouths, but they are certainly more provocative. And
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and people who are provocative, just in general, they tend to maybe become more viral or get retweeted, because it could be that you retweet someone, you don't say something directly, but someone else retweets it, and this person could be a famous person or something, and so now you feel safer. I think that this is another phenomenon which I think hasn't been investigated as much. But the idea is that, think about it this way, like imagine that there's a very provocative message and you're thinking that, but maybe you don't want to put it out there because you might feel that it's too extreme. But let's say someone else puts it out there, and then you might feel more comfortable retweeting it. And so just those kinds of very interesting social phenomena are, can be studied using social media. That, what if you just retweet it? Are you more comfortable doing that? Or is there, for some messages, we can imagine that you will never be comfortable endorsing the message in any way, like, maybe some kind of hate speech or something like that. You might not endorse it because you might not believe in it, but even if you believe in it, you might still not endorse it because it's too extreme. Then
sorry to cut you off there. I think it might be interesting to see if that this would be a lot of data crunching and probably maybe not worth it, but I would want to know if somebody became more extreme before and after COVID. Because I do think that, I think I've seen that anecdotally, of some people that probably were pretty quiet on some stuff, but now they feel pretty intense now. They, and maybe because they've been indoors so long, or maybe because there's this change of their fear for their life, which in their hierarchy of needs, that does matter, And then I also think that maybe because there's a civil liberty deal here where, we actually are kind of crossing some wires of the Constitution a little bit here in the name of safety.
I think we already have evidence. Yeah, we already have evidence of that. I mean, we don't necessarily need social media, I think, for that, because we know people are coming out, they're protesting. And, for those kinds of things, it's I think, easier to send out a survey, which is also something we might do later on, which is that, if we send out a targeted survey, maybe even incentivize people to enter it in the hopes that they may win like a gift card or something. I mean, there are ways to incentivize. But basically, we send out a survey and ask the question about whether the COVID-19, whether they participated in a protest or they voiced their opinion on some public platform, and whether it was the first time that they did that and why they did it. So I think there's a lot of, I think what all of this shows is that this is not just a medical phenomenon. So I think the central message that is very important to for everyone to realize is that it goes beyond the health aspect. I mean, the health aspect is the central one, no question about it. But beyond that, it has now sort of has a life of its own in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, in the legal sphere. Like what is legal, what isn't legal, and what can the government do? What kind of laws is it invoking? Like not just legality of issues, but also how the government is invoking certain legal mandates, in the name of public health or all of these things. Like how is it using certain laws, or what's it doing? How effective is it? The economic response has been unprecedented. The kind of stimulus programs, directly sending checks to people. I mean, that literally is unprecedented. It has never happened before, to my knowledge, and at least in the US, right? And so like that kind of thing, how effective is that? Because, till just a few months ago, the universal basic income was like like no one was seriously considering it. very small fraction. But now it seems like that is happening in the here and now, where we are literally sending checks to people, and who fall below a certain income range or whatever the requirements are. So there is a very real social and economic phenomena which I think needs to be documented. And so the media is doing a good job. I think they are documenting many different parts of it. The visualizations have been amazing. Like, I've been looking at a lot of visualizations that a lot of news media put out. It truly shows how far visualization has come, in terms of doing data-driven visualization. We want to actually study some of that as well, how the media has been looking at the crisis and what kinds of tools it might have been using and how data-driven was it. So I think that part also needs to be explored. But I also want to mention the second part of it. So I said that the historian part is very important, the storytelling, the documenting, using a combination of technology and just sort of common sense, if you will, or traditional methods even. But there's the second aspect, which is the more predictive aspect. So if we learn that, the social media did have a signal that could have predicted some of what was to come, and that in turn, if we had predicted that, we might have been able to do a better job with the crisis response. Then that there's a utilitarian aspect as well to that, which is that here's some evidence. We can only hypothesize whether how this would have worked out if we had heeded the signal, but at least there was a signal. So let's try to first determine, was there a signal that preceded a lot of the disasters? So we know that in February there was a certain day when I think the stock market fell really badly. And there were other things like that. There were days when the stock market fell. There were the lockdowns, right? They occurred on specific dates. Even before that, the news media had started officially reporting that it would happen. But there were official dates for lockdowns. There were dates for certain things. So now we know that in advance. And so the question is, which came first? Did the social media precede all of this, or was it a sort of was it on a parallel track where all of these things, none of them predicted one another? They were all happening at the same time and reflecting one another. Or was there a signal that came before? Was there an indicator? So I think that's a question too. That's the more utilitarian aspect of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll be very interesting to see. So what about the data that has been currently used to drive a lot of these decisions? I think we could go more on the governmental front here. And I don't know how much purview you had in that, but and I would never call what I do research, because I think a lot of people use that word very loosely. But I have felt like the data that has been presented has been very pretty. There's a lot of things, but I feel like we haven't drilled down very low, because to me, I think as somebody who's just, I don't pay that much attention to the news, but enough so I'm safe and I know what to do. I don't really know if I could safely say how many people, if they actually died from COVID or not, if it was the major reason or not. And social media is all over the place on it. The news season seems all over the place. So you have to have some kind of thought there, being such a big data person, or just a data person in general. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll just tell you this. I'll try not to be controversial, but it is very interesting to me that in all of these numbers, what I am not seeing is breakdown by age. So how old is someone when they die? And this is, interestingly enough, this only came to my attention because someone else mentioned it, and they were not even based here. They were in a different country, and so they were telling me that this whole lockdown thing, it's having a very bad effect on young people and on working age people. So I was like, why do you say that? It's keeping them safe, right? And then that person was like, I was doing some research, and it turns out that in a lot of places, the people who have died, the majority of the people who have died, were apparently very old. Like, they skewed towards the older end. And I don't know the exact numbers, but that to me is disturbing in itself, that we haven't seen discussions on certain aspects of this. Like, sort of, is it really all that bad for young people? Like, what is the risk factor for a young person versus an older person? Because that young person is going to lose their job. They're not in retirement. So they are facing a very hard time. And, so that is one side of it. It's something to talk about. I'm not saying that there is an answer one way or the other, but I'm not seeing enough of a conversation. I look for it every single day in all the newsletters, everything that is subscribed to, that when will there be a discussion on age? I haven't seen that discussion on age in any of the data. All I see are the numbers, this many cases. Then there was there are some cases where they are now learning. There were a few news articles that far more people have had COVID than we realized. So there were a couple of news articles which said that, in San Francisco and in some of the other places, the first infections actually occurred much earlier than what we had thought. At that time, there was no lockdown. That in fact, in January and February, a much higher percentage of the population got infected, and then they recovered. And they kind of thought they had the flu. I mean, this was not being taken seriously at that time, obviously. We wouldn't have known how to test for it, even if it had. But there are many more people have had this virus. It seems so. The numbers, we don't know what the infection rates really are in that sense. We're just learning as we do more testing. But it seems like we were very off in some places and some numbers. So we're not seeing enough about the errors. Like, where were the errors made and by how far off were the errors? And also, those kinds of things we're not seeing. We're not seeing, let me see. There's this very interesting aspect of this, which is mental health, right? Now, in normal times, mental health is a very big topic, right? Like, people are always going on about, that, we need to be less sort of stigmatic, if you will, less kind of more open about mental illness, that people should talk about it more, there needs to be more work on this. You have movies that have been made on it, a lot of conversation around mental illness and mental health, which is great. But now in this COVID-19 crisis, I'm not seeing that much talk about mental health. I mean, you just kind of have the platitudes in some newsletters that, take care of yourself, don't overwork yourself, this and that. But there are people who are seriously living with depression, and there's a lot of, just a lot of issues around mental health and mental illness that there's no conversation happening. So I don't know who those people are, what their problems are. Everything from domestic abuse, I'm sure the incidents, common sense suggests that maybe the incidence of domestic abuse would have gone up. I mean, my parents actually pointed that out. They were like, in some of the poor people, and India has a lot of poor people still, like many developing countries. They were like, well, this is so terrible for the workmen, the daily laborer, not just because they are paid daily wages, so they are going to lose a source of sustenance, but also because, there's a lot of domestic abuse in that a certain section of that population, because they drink a lot and they don't treat women properly. And so there's a higher incidence of domestic abuse. And then now they're stuck at home and they are, you can sort of imagine, right? It makes a bad situation worse. They are already on the brink of sort of living a hand-to-mouth existence. And then on top of all this, so there's all this frustration, the domestic abuse, the depression. In advanced countries, there are, other kinds of things that we have to look at, high stress levels, longer work days, all of that. I just want to know how it stands. I want there to be a conversation around that. And, and so I'm not seeing that. So, I'm not seeing a lot on that. So just those kinds of things, it's very disturbing to me that there are blank spots.
Yeah. And I think that's, when you talk about the historical aspects that you're talking about with going through this data, I think that hopefully when we come out of this, one of the major conversations will be, okay, let's make this better for next time, and not just a medical response way. I think there's need, just like in a business, you wouldn't just say, okay, I just need to focus on that one area that went bad. It's like, what about all those peripheral areas that we didn't really focus on? And I think there's going to be a ton in that. I do want to shift some gears because we could talk about this all day, and it's very interesting, by the way. I think it's, and to me, I do want to make another point too. I don't really stand politically anywhere on this because I'm not an expert, so I never do. But I am, I'm an e-commerce person, so data is big for me, and that's been the big area that I've seen lovely charts. But I'm like, okay, I would love to drill down, like you said, age. To me, was it the primary cause of death? Secondary? Was it greater than 40%? 40 to, just ranges, whatever it would be, because I think that would calm a lot of people, because the conversation gets spiraled out of control when there's a lot of left out, so people can just fill in their own blanks with it. All right. So
but since you mentioned e-commerce, I do want to say that e-commerce is a very big application of knowledge graphs. Just shifting gears a little bit, I mean, the Amazon product graph, actually, I don't know if you heard about that, but that's a big, big thing. It's actually one of the biggest use cases of a knowledge graph in the last several years. And I've had personal contact with the team, actually, that the team of researchers who are in Amazon, who research Amazon product graph and who are responsible for Amazon's product graph. But the reason why search is such an amazing experience on Amazon today, despite if you think about it, it has a very challenging job, right? There's so many products and so many parties. It's not like it's all just its own products. I mean, it's actually a marketplace, right? So when you think about it, when you look at the sheer breadth of products and the sheer breadth of providers on the platform, and the fact that it's actually able to do a pretty good job of search, I would say, at least for me and for a lot of other people, they are able to find what they're looking for usually on Amazon. They don't just get irrelevant results when they're searching most of the time.
Which is even more amazing, because the back end, I've sold a lot on Amazon, the back end to put your product up when you want to create a new listing,
right,
new ASIN, is really bad. So because it's really hard to upgrade that because you have all these SKUs that are still there, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what do we do? So literally, if I could sell a mouse, sometimes there will be options in there to select that have nothing to do with a mouse.
Yeah.
Not even close.
But what they've done, obviously, is then put layers on top of that. Maybe give some people who have because I have listeners that will have no idea about some of the stuff we're talking about. Maybe go a little more in depth what you're talking about there with Amazon and the search and some of these conversations. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah. So in the product graph, what Amazon calls the product graph, the entities are things like products. So you have the product, which is we can think of it as the name of the product, but if you think about it, the name is not the only thing about a product. A product is an entity. And so it has a name. It also has all kinds of other things. With clothing, for example, you have sizes, you have colors, and so on. And you can think of a product as a bag of attributes. And what that means is that imagine that you have, sort of like a key value data structure, where you have depending on the category of the product, you have a certain set of attributes that make sense. So size doesn't make sense for, let's see, like a book, right? So if you're buying a book, there's no size, so there's a different format for that. There's a Kindle, there's hardcover, there's softcover, but the hardcover and softcover will not make sense for a clothing item, right? So if you think about it, the products can fall under categories. There are many categories, thousands of categories. And, there are brands, there's companies, there's, all those things. And now imagine that, you think of it almost like a social network. So that's what we mean by a graph, where you have the products, they are connected to brands and they are connected to attributes. These are the relationships between the product and its attributes. But then these attributes are shared with other products. The brand also makes other products. So now you have this vast interconnected structure where you have all these entities, they are connected to each other by all kinds of relationships. And this makes for a very rich search experience. If you can turn that, into a search engine, then it makes it very easy to actually drill down and to search by size, to search by other things. And you can also use it for recommendation, so that's a different, I think the thing that you were mentioning earlier is more of a recommender engine, where you try to figure out what should go to number one when someone searches for it. But it's related to this, because if I like a certain set of brands, the search engine, if it wants to do a good job recommending that to me in the future, it needs to recognize that I like the brand, and so it needs to associate the brand with me, the customer, so just those, and then that's a relationship, right? And so from my search experience, from the products that I've bought, you can infer that using machine learning. So it's a very general way of thinking about e-commerce. And about any domain, so previously in the COVID-19, the domain of interest was the genes and proteins, biological entities, etc. In a financial domain, the entities of interest would be companies, stock ticker symbols, the elements you see in the earnings reports and the filings and so on. Um, in this domain, the e-commerce, the domain is usually products. So if you're someone like Amazon, you want to build a very big product graph. But if you're more narrow, if you're a clothing based e-commerce, or you have a very specific narrow domain, then you would want a more specific product graph. So we are starting to see a lot of interest from a number of e-commerce companies. I've had contacts with some of them, where they really want to use a knowledge graph. They want to build a knowledge graph, and then they want to integrate that into their search engine, into their web experience, to better give a search experience that is sort of richer, enables people to find what they're looking for much faster, because that way the probability goes up that they will check out, right? And will help you to sort of be more efficient with the funnel, right? And
and just the whole experience. So one word that gets kicked around a lot is AI, right?
Yes.
A lot of what you're talking about has a piece of that, maybe more machine learning, but maybe AI. And I know you have some background in there. What do you see? What I'd like to know is where do you see the future? Kind of, you can take it near, far, wherever you want to do, of AI, and more in the areas that you're knowledgeable in.
So, I mean, all of this involves some degree of AI and machine learning, because the way that you build a knowledge graph requires a lot of AI. So, specifically, the natural language processing is a very dominant field in this area, where you are looking at the text and you're trying to build this graph out of the text, out of the descriptions and these things, and then you have to normalize things. You might have two people who are selling the same thing, but they call it slightly different names. They have a different representation, some, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of matching and a lot of extracting and a lot of even contradictions might exist in the data that you may have to correct. So all of that uses AI and machine learning. Today, I think that at least within the community, we do not distinguish between these terms. So there is a non-machine learning side of AI, but it tends to be so rare that it almost always, when we say AI, we really do mean machine learning. In a lot of time, it may not mean deep learning. So there's an erroneous conclusion that a lot of people draw, which is that all machine learning is deep learning. So that's not true. So there is a lot of non-deep learning, and it's not necessary that everything is about deep neural networks and all of that. But in general, machine learning is very dominant now. So I think that almost all AI research that is happening right now is pretty much all machine learning. The applications you see in industry and so on are all machine learning, mixed in with what we call good old-fashioned AI, GoFi, which is good old-fashioned AI, which is the more classic stuff. Like you have the rule-based systems, used to be very popular at one point of time, and this sort of classic AI methods. They're still around and they're still very useful, but the machine learning variety has really taken over in a very big way. I would say since the early 2000s, it has started becoming very dominating, and by this point, it is very dominant. So they're kind of equivalent, and they're all used a lot in all of these different areas, knowledge graphs and so on. The future, I think what people are really looking forward to, I mean, there's a disconnect over here between, I would say, industry and academia, where academia is actually a lot more ambitious. So that is it's usually the other way around, I think, in many disciplines. But in AI, academics tend to think very far down the line. And a lot of the things that industry is now implementing and taking in, with some exceptions, we have already done that 20 years ago. So a lot of the knowledge graph and all these things, the core technologies the groundwork was laid more than 20 years ago. But then, sort of Google came along and did some more research on that, and it had a lot of data on which to apply that. So then it integrated that into its search engine, and so the knowledge graph became a very big thing for that reason. And then in e-commerce now, of course, you see Amazon and other companies doing it. So it's starting to come in, but it's been around. Also, natural language processing, information extraction, all of these things have been around, but the deep learning has accelerated the performance. And there is a real marriage between industry and academia. So we have a lot of people from academia who work very closely with industry, and I'm one of them. And it's not, we're very applied, very fast moving, very applied, very data driven. I think it's a very data driven field. industry publishes a lot of open source software. Facebook research, Google research, they publish a lot of open source frameworks. They're not hiding their software anymore. They even publish some good data sets every now and then. They come to conferences, they collaborate with the machine learning researchers and so on. So it's a golden time to be in AI and machine learning because everyone is in it together. There is no real distance between academics and industry. But in terms of the problems that we are trying to tackle, I think industry is more interested in, as they should be, in sort of implementing what has already been done in a way, in a bigger way on their data, on their customers, recommendation engines, and so on. So they are much more, and you go beyond the big four, the big tech companies, and you look at the broader industry. So we have to look at the two sections of industry a little bit differently also. There are the big tech companies, very tech dominated, Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and then you have the rest of them. There's a whole section of industry that is not Silicon Valley and is not the tech companies. So if you look at those industries, I think they are in for a very exciting time because they are discovering just how much potential there is in all this technology. And they are really starting to implement it. They've started to realize that it's not just hype. There is a lot of benefit to adopting data-driven technology, AI and so on. And even the low-hanging fruit is very profitable. So they are still in the phase where they are actually just making use of the low-hanging fruit and they're still seeing a lot of benefit. Now for us, I think the future is what we call general AI. And so general AI is sort of building an AI which is not just good at one thing. So you don't just have one AI for face recognition. You don't just have one AI for machine translation. You don't just have one AI for doing this or that. But it's really more like a human being where the AI is good at very general kinds of reasoning. And and I think that is really the big leap. We don't know when that will happen. It's a very challenging problem, but I work on that, and it's a very exciting and very interesting problem. We're learning a lot about the human mind also by doing that. What does it take to be intelligent? What is intelligence? I think those are questions you have to think about very deeply because playing chess isn't it. Like once upon a time, there was this notion, as you pointed out, if you memorize things, you're good at math, you can multiply two numbers very quickly, you can play chess very well. That used to be the classic definition of being a very smart person, and it's probably correlated with that. But we
Except
now know
those all have finite rules. Those all have rules.
Like everything has finite rules. No, I think that
the world doesn't have the rules that math has. Well,
no, I think it's not quite like that, right? I mean, if you think about face recognition, it doesn't have any rules either as such. I mean, we can't list the rules. Yeah, you can't actually list the rules, but we have built machines that are very good at face recognition. And then there are some games that do have rules. I mean, all games have rules actually, but there are no, I mean, you can't play a game that has no rules. It's kind of like make-believe, right? So all games have rules. We even have AIs now, like AlphaZero, that was released by DeepMind, bought by Google. That even if you don't tell the machine the rules, like all it has to do is play the game, and it will make a lot of mistakes. But if you give it some time, it will, even without telling it the rules, it will still figure out what the rules are, and it will beat you. It will beat the grandmaster. So it has, we've now had AIs that can beat, not just chess, but chess happened a long time ago where we were able to beat the grandmaster. We didn't need deep learning for that, but with the deep learning, we have been able to beat. As a community, and especially due to DeepMind, we have really been able to score very impressive successes, beating grandmasters in Go, in video games, even in poker, right? And even games where you don't give it the rules, and they've shown that it will learn the rules for itself as long as they are consistent and regular, and will still do it. So, and then you have the other things, the face recognition and the machine translation and so on, where also the performance has been very, very good, and in some cases has exceeded human performance. But there are no rules that it knows of. It wouldn't be able to tell you also what the rules are. It's a black box. It just does it very well.
And I think that's where AI really starts becoming intelligent, right? Is when you get outside those boundaries. What about, okay, so after COVID, right, there's going to be a lot of people that lost their jobs, a lot of people that are going to lose out on some life stuff. There's going to be a lot of winners too.
Yeah.
Do you see anything with kind of your background or just even your thoughts here of like, where are some areas of opportunity? What would, if somebody wanted to do a startup, what would be a great thing to do coming out of COVID, or even right now, right?
I mean, the education sector, I think, is really in for I mean, I don't want to say an upheaval because I mean, but
Overall.
I think it's an over. Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't know what the right word is, but I think we are. I think the people who come out with really good ed tech could be some of the next winners because we are starting to see, like for example, you had USC, as well as in almost every top university that I can think of. It's pretty much all online, right? We're all online, and it's going to stay that way for a while. And my sense is that after it's over, um, some universities, or at least a certain section of even very big universities, will want to stay with this format. Or they might actually realize that, okay, there is value in the on campus experience, but this doesn't work that badly. Like this whole Zoom thing and like teaching classes on the machine and, like sort of proctoring exams on the machine and so on. It's really, even with existing technology, it's not doing too badly, not as badly as we thought it might. I mean, students are able to log in and they are doing very well right now. I mean, it's gone very smoothly so far. We started this in the middle of the semester when the whole lockdown thing happened. And it's been all online since then. And the students have, there are some reservations, but by and large, it's gone very well. Including at the high school level, even many high schools have shifted to that model. So I think the educational model is a very important one in which to innovate because there are many questions that still need to be answered. Like how do we make it engaging, and how do we, what kinds of models can we build that are not so linear and so where we're trying to fit the online model to the old model, but can we actually build a new model using the online tools that we have to make the learning experience more engaging. So I think, and then the person who actually does that and manages to transition that to a lot of high schools, to a lot of colleges, to manages to get market essentially, could become a very dominant player potentially. So some people are trying for that. Then of course there's the technology itself. Like we have a few people like Zoom and Blue Jeans, which was bought by Verizon. I mean, Google has its own offering, obviously, and so on. But there is ample opportunity still, in this space. And then VR, obviously a big one. People were not. It was already doing very well, I think, in a way, but maybe not moving as fast as I think it could, because the headsets are still a little bit expensive. They're a little bit clunky, even the very best ones from Oculus and so on. It's still not quite there yet. I mean, we haven't seen it catch on to the same extent as social media and some of the other things that caught on last decade, right? The smartphone, the social media, those things. So VR could be a big one. So there's a common theme over here, right? Which is that how do we make this kind of life sort of very dominant, where the online communication aspect is very dominant, whether we're working, whether we're entertaining, whether we are teaching, learning. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of space over there. It's like the new internet age in a way.
I think so too. And a lot of businesses came out of 2008, 2009 because people, were forced to innovate. It was a piece of it, but also because people are going to be forced. They see the whole. If they're not online now, I might have zero revenue then. And also some people now realize, like you were saying, that it's not so bad to teach online. And I see a lot of opportunity in the education space, especially, now it's one of the biggest benefits of education is, and this sounds bad, but it is a daycare as well. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're not having a multicultural learning experience as we should at this day and age. But I think that will get figured out. Okay, so I want to move into a couple things. So you've had your work funded by DARPA and IARPA. Like, give me that story.
Oh, so it's an institutional story because, so our institute, the institute where I am affiliated, which is called the Information Sciences Institute, or ISI, it has always been predominantly funded by agencies like DARPA. So it was in fact created by the founders of the institute, are people from industry. They're not there anymore because it was created in the 70s. And they were from industry. They were already very prominent in Department of Defense circles and so on. So they came to LA, or maybe they were already in LA, I don't know. but they created the institute, and it became affiliated with USC. So it's part of USC, and it falls under the Viterbi School of Engineering. And so that's why, we have those of us who are professors have joint appointments usually with campus. We are a professor in some departments, like Department of Computer Science, or in my case, the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering, and so on. And at the same time, we are at the institute. So the institute is a very unique outfit in that sense, where the DARPA and IARPA came very naturally, since that was always the predominant model of funding. Although we are involved in all the rest also, the National Science Foundation, NSF, some researchers who have a more biological or bioinformatics background also have some NIH funding and so on. So there's traditional rounds of funding, but the big money really comes from, I would say, DARPA. And I joined in 2016, and so I was funded under a DARPA project. So my boss had a big DARPA project, and he hired me under that. And I should also say that it's a soft money institute. So what that means is that the institute pretty much raises its own money, from external sources. So it doesn't, unlike the teaching departments, where some of the money is externally raised, and the tenure track faculty, for example, they are sort of not responsible for 9 months of the salary. And what that means is that they get paid from the campus for 9 months, and they are usually responsible for the summer or for the students. If you want students and so on, you have to raise the money. So different rules. I mean, these are not general, I'm not sort of saying that these are hard rules, but generally speaking, the most people on campus, most professors on campus are not responsible for raising 100% of their pay. Whereas at ISI, because it's soft money, we are very good at fundraising. We have to be, because we pretty much raise completely our own pay, and not only that, but also the overhead and all of that. We have to actually raise a multiple times our pay, because a part of that goes into overhead. We have to hire staff, equipment, all of that. So in some sense, we have to raise a lot of money between all of us. And we are well known for that, I would say, in the academic community. At USC, after the medical school, we are the second largest fundraiser. I think in 2016 or 17, we raised more than $100 million, something like that. So yeah, it's a pretty impressive fundraising outfit in that sense. And it's a lot of fun, because I feel like DARPA, I really like the way DARPA does things, to be honest, because it has very ambitious ideas, So people who know the history of DARPA know that it created this thing called the ARPANET back in the 60s, in the Sputnik era. I mean, DARPA was really created as a response to Sputnik. And, so it always has this mindset that, we have to stay dominant in technology, and have to do the kind of research that will make the country stay dominant. And so it has always looked 20 years, 30 years into the future. Back in the day, created the ARPANET, which became the internet, and then became the World Wide Web. And so it's always sort of looked at these very moonshot kind of ideas. So I really enjoy that, because all the ideas we work on right now, I would say, are all moonshot, including the general AI idea. We're working on that. We're working on some other ideas. I do a lot of work in social good, AI for social good, like human trafficking and so on. That was also started with DARPA. So I really enjoy that side of it, because when the new call comes out, that, okay, here's a new call, and, we invite everyone to submit proposals, it's a lot of fun, because you really have to put on both an ideas hat as well as a business hat, because you have to convince them that you can do it, that, okay, this is you're asking for a wild problem to solve a wild problem, and we have an equally wild solution to solve your wild problem. But, how can you trust us to do it? And do we have the right team? And do we have the right budget? And so on. So there's a very, sort of business hat that you really do have to put on, because it's not just one person or one institute. Usually our proposals are multi-institute. So in many of them, we invite other institutions to be part of it. There are always a lot of people involved, different fields involved. So we have to kind of figure out all kinds of things. Who's going to be doing what? How do we make it all come together? How do we present this budget? How do we write the proposal so it's convincing? It's a lot of fun.
I've never would have thought I would have said this about an organization like DARPA or something, but that sounds like you're pitching to like a VC. It sounds like you're a startup trying to get funding.
It's absolutely like that. I think it is 100% like that. And even the competition is like that. It's much tougher, actually. I would say the competition is much harder than a startup pitching to a VC, Because, I mean, let's face it, I've spoken to actual VCs, I'm sure you have too, where sure, they like to cite these rates that, there's a 1% chance of getting funded and so on. But, the reality is that a majority of the people who come to them for funding are just not ready. I mean, they shouldn't be there, right? And so naturally the rate gets driven low because you have people who don't know anything about startups. They've never worked for a startup. They may never even have worked, right? And they may not really know how to pitch. They may not know what their idea is. They may not have done some early customer validation. They may not have actually, asked the most fundamental questions that they should be asking. And then they go and look for funding, right? Because they're kind of maybe sort of, they look at this as a very glamorous thing, where you go out and you get money and you become a millionaire and so on. But in the darker context, in the fundraising context, even just the barrier to submitting a proposal is very high because you can't just go up to a PM, a program manager, and just pitch your idea. There's an entire infrastructure that is in place, and usually only companies and universities can apply for these kinds of funds. So individuals really can't. And so the companies and the institutions that apply for this funding, they already have an infrastructure in place. So they already have business officers and they already have researchers or people who have the product, right? And so we come with a certain degree of experience to this. It's not frivolous or trivial. And despite that, the rate is still very low. So everyone under the sun cries for it. And, who can cry for it, who has the chops to cry for it. And still there's a very small fraction of people that win. So it's extremely competitive, and it's a lot of fun. You have to be very good in several different fields. Your reputation has to be good. That's the ISI has a very good reputation with DARPA, so that helps. But also you really have to speak to the PM. You have to really understand, well, what does this person want? Then how can I pitch it to them? And you have to do it in writing. But even before the writing part, there is the soft wheeling and dealing also. Does the PM know me? Do I know the PM? Have I talked to them before? Have I tried to understand their needs? Have I tried to predict that this problem might show up next year? And have I thought about it enough? And do I have the team in place? And do I have the social skills to go out and get those people that I want on my team and convince them that yes, they should be on my team and they have a good chance of winning on my team. So it's a very there's a lot of social, which is a lot of fun. I love it.
Sounds awesome.
So you were nominated for the Forbes 30 under 30 in the science category. How'd that even happen? How'd that come about?
I think the way it happened was that I was invited to as a Forbes under 30 scholar. So that was an easy application, and sort of applied for that, because I'm also a business school student. One of the advantages of being in a university is that you can actually pursue other things, on the side, and the university is very good to you when you do that. So, I'm pursuing an MBA on the side because I'm very interested in creating my own startup and so on. And so because I'm a business school student, I was invited to the Forbes. They have this whole Forbes 30 under 30 or Forbes under 30 sort of event. I think there's a big event that happens every single year. Last year it was in Detroit. Before that it was in Boston. So that was the one I went to. And it's a lot of the under 30 and 30 under 30 people show up, companies show up, everyone showed up. And so I was there and I met some of the people from Forbes. And, we were just talking. I was telling them about my work. And then they were like, yeah, you should apply for this and then, see what happens. And I made it to the very last stage, and so I was on the short list for that, but I couldn't quite make it to the absolute 30 under 30. But I did make it to the short list. So it was,
fun.
It was fun. Yeah, it's not considered very prestigious in my specific environment, my professional environment. I mean, it's like a nice thing to have, but it's not really considered like a prestigious award in the scientific environment, obviously. But it was very nice to show off. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I got it. I made the short list. It was more like a way of showing that I am actually under 30 years old when I actually made it. And I was like, that was my indirect way of saying that, okay, I'm under 30 years old. And, that was kind of the real value. I kind of feel like that was the indirect value of that.
Right. All right. So I want to do a couple personal questions when we have a little bit shorter time here. So
You've done a lot already with your career, but what does success look like for you?
I think if my work stands the test of time, that is one. And I think most scientists want that. Like deep in their hearts, that is really what a lot of scientists want. They want to discover something so fundamental or do something so fundamental that it really outlives you. And that is the moonshot of any scientist. I think, if you ask me, any good scientist. So I think that is one part of it. But then the second part of it, which is, um, I want to influence people through my writings, so that is important to me too. So I love writing, and, whenever possible, I try to engage with the broader community. So whether that's through a web modality or, it's through non-scientific writing, or just even in scientific writing, we just recently submitted a textbook to MIT Press. It will be coming out later this year. But even that, it's not that I had to do it. It took a lot of effort to do it. But I feel like if I did that on knowledge graphs, so it's a textbook on knowledge graphs. And I feel like by doing it, I'm reaching out to a much broader audience, because it's meant to be understandable to not just researchers and scientists, but to graduate students, to upper level undergraduate students, can be used in courses, for example, but also practitioners, data scientists, and so on. So it's very important to me to not just have impact in my field, um, but to actually have a lot of impact. The human trafficking work, I work with federal agencies, with law enforcement, and so on. I want to create a startup to maybe see whether I can actually have impact on that side of the aisle, because I come from a business community. My parents, everyone in my family is actually an entrepreneur. No one is an academic. So it's in that sense, I chose a very different route. Maybe I chose it because it was different. But they are very entrepreneurial. So somewhere that training is there. I like taking risks. I like doing things which are a little bit wild. I'm not a very risk averse person. I like taking risks. I'm okay with failing every now and then. And I feel like there's no such thing as a complete failure. There's always some way to salvage what you're doing and get something out of it. Besides the learning experience,
Yeah, I completely agree. So what advice would you give your 16-year-old self, right? If you had to look back and give yourself some advice?
Oh my gosh, I am not so sure I would give advice.
That's probably
I was very. I can see all the flaws. When I say I wouldn't give advice, it doesn't mean that I'm happy with the way I was back then, because I can totally see all the problems. When I look back, I can see how naive I was, and all of that. But my fear is that there's a paradox in this, because if I go back and give them that advice, and they take the advice, there's no guarantee that the outcome would be good. And maybe I learned my lesson too soon. There is that thing, if you become wise too soon, if you learn your lesson too soon, I feel like there are very bad consequences. So I feel that it's actually good to not know a lot of things when you're starting out. Like, it's actually good to make those mistakes, to even make really stupid mistakes, because they stay with you, and they might help you to not make the big mistakes. So I'm not sure I would give any advice. I would just maybe ask that person to keep a more open mind, because I do feel that as I've kind of gone on, I have become more open minded. And interestingly enough, so I would ask that person that, you might think you have everything figured out, but you don't. So just like change that part about you. Like, don't be so arrogant that you think you have it all figured out, like everyone else. You might have read a lot of books and all of that, but it's not. There is a bias in everything. So I would ask my 16-year-old to not form opinions too quickly, and to keep an open mind. But beyond that, I don't think I would change anything. I'm really happy with the way things turned out. And even though I can point to a lot of mistakes, and I've certainly been very lucky, but it's worked out. It really has worked out. So I feel very blessed. And I don't think I would want to change anything much. I've learned things at the right time. I feel that I've learned things at the right time. I really do.
So the last question I have, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh my Lord. I'm too young for that. I literally just turned 30. And in December. So, how would I like to be remembered? I think I would, so when the kind of the people who I've worked with, including the federal agencies, who I have a partnership with in trying to fight child sex trafficking, and my students, who I can be very tough on at times. Um, if they remember that, if I have a good impact on them and they actually remember that I learned a few things or I became as good as I was because I had this mentor at this point, or maybe we rescued this victim because of the help that we got from him, and so on. I think that is a very nice way of I probably won't know when they say that or what they do, because it's not like it's going to come out in print or anything. But that, if I think that would be a very nice way to be remembered. And also, I would want to know that my writings have had some impact. So I feel that if I write good stuff, and if my writings have added value over time, then it will show up in citations, and in not just citation, but also just who is reading it, who's commenting on it. Is it provocative? Is it actually sometimes the best pieces of writing are provocative. So is it provocative? Did it make people think? Did it cause a lot of discussion? Did it change the way maybe that a certain field looked at a certain issue, or even that the way that people thought? I want to write a non-fiction book, for example, on social media and so on. So hopefully those will have impact. So I think the writing is the impact of the writing in a more practical sense. I think if my writing has impact and I see that in the numbers and so on, that could be something to look forward to. So that is important, I think, and that is very visible. You can make out when you're having impact. I think through the writing, I mean, just you can't keep people quiet nowadays. So they are going to discuss it. They are going to buy your thing. They are going to download it. They are going to cite it. There are 10,000 different ways in which people are going to express that they are getting influenced by your work, whether they agree or disagree. I think they have infinite number of ways now to express that they are getting influenced. No one keeps it quiet. So I would want to know that I've had influence, and my writings have had influence in a good way. It made people think. So that's kind of the more realistic way of, yeah.
Well, I love it. It was a super pleasure to have you on here. I mean, it's just so interesting because your thought process is, although we're in completely different fields, you kind of look at things very similar to the way I do. And it was very enjoyable to have you on the podcast. I think it's very timely, and your message is very powerful. So
thank you.